Good day to our very handsome and cheerful professor, Sir Jadwin T. Labiano. Today, we are going to present our final project. But before we start, I wanted to give a brief discussion about our subject, Computer Fundamentals and Programming. This subject deals with computer science, computer applications, and information technology. It provides a thorough overview of all the fundamental concepts to computer science and programming. To give a brief overview or history about C++ programming and the basic elements of C++ program, here is Mr. Floyd K. Aquino.
The C++ programming language has a history going back to 1979 when Bjarne Stroustrup worked for his PhD thesis. He began work on C with classes, which the name implies was meant to be a superset of the C language. In 1983, the name of the language was changed from C with classes to C++. The ++ operator in the C language is an operator for incrementing a variable, which gives some insight into how Stroustrup regarded the language. In 1985, C++ was implemented as a commercial product. The language was not officially standardized yet. The language was updated again in 1989 to include protected and static members and an inheritance from several classes. In 1990, Turbo C++ was released as a commercial product. Turbo C++ added many additional libraries, which have had a considerable impact on C++ development. In 1998, the C++ Standards Committee published the first international standard, which is informally known as C++98. In 2003, the C++98 was revised because of reported problems and was changed into C++03. In mid-2011, the new C++ standard known as C++11 was finished. On December 15, 2014, C++14 was released. This version is intended to be a small extension over C++11. In 2017, the C++17 version was released. It is a revision of the ISO/IEC 14882 standard for the C++ programming language. Currently, we are now using the C++20, which is a revision of the ISO/IEC standard for the C++ programming language following C++17 and was published by the ISO last December 2020. Let us now move on to the basic elements of C++ program. Typically, the first program beginners write is a program called Hello World, which simply prints Hello World to your computer screen. Although it is very simple, it contains all the fundamental components C++ programs have. The C++ language defines several headers, which contain information that is either necessary or useful to your program. For this program, the header iOS stream is needed. The line using namespace std tells the compiler to use the std namespace. Namespaces are a relatively recent addition to C++. The next line, /main, is where the program execution begins. It's a single-line comment available in C++. Single-line comments begin with / and stops at the end of the line. The line int main is the main function where program execution begins. The next line, cout left shift operator hello world, causes the message hello world to be displayed on the screen. The next line, return 0, terminates main function and causes it to return the value 0 to the calling process. For the identifier, a valid identifier is a sequence of one or more letters, digits, or underscore characters, wherein spaces, punctuation marks, and symbols cannot be part of an identifier. In addition, identifiers shall always begin with a letter. The C++ language is a case-sensitive language. That means that an identifier written in capital letters is not equivalent to another one with the same name but written in small letters. There are 4 fundamental data types, which are character types, numerical integer types, floating point types, and boolean type. The syntax to declare a new variable in C++ is straightforward. We simply write the type followed by the variable name. This is its identifier. For example, int a and float my number. To declare a variable type int called x and initialize it to a value of 0 from the same moment it is declared, we can write int x is equal to 0. C++ uses a convenience abstraction called stream to perform input and output operations in sequential media such as the screen, the keyboard, or a file. A stream is an entity where a program can either insert or extract characters to or from. The standard input stream is the cin, while the standard output stream is cout. Let us see some examples of C++ program. Here is Mr. Ginnomar Marcelo to present.
Let us have some basic examples of C++ programs. First is displaying the input value. Here is the sample code. First, the user will declare the variable num. Second, it will display enter an integer. Third, the user will input a value. Fourth, it will display the number you have entered is and the value that the user entered. Next example is finding the product of two numbers. Here is the sample code. First, the variables n1, n2, and product were declared. Second, it will display enter first number. Third, the program will ask for the first number and the user will input it. Fourth, it will display enter second number. Fifth, the program will ask for the second number and the user will input it. Sixth, the program will substitute the values entered by the user in the formula declared. 7. The program will display the product of the two numbers is and the value of the product computed. Finally, let's have our final example, finding the sum of two numbers. Here is the code. First, the variables num1, num2, and sum was declared. Second, it will display enter two integers. Third, the user will input two integers. Fourth, the program will substitute the entered values in the formula declared. Fifth, it will display the sum is and the computed value. Let us now move on to control structure. Here is Mr. Allan to present the topic.
Control structures are just a way to specify flow of control in programs. Any algorithm or program can be clearer and more understood if they use self-contained modules called as logic or control structures. It basically analyzes and chooses in which direction a program flows based on certain parameters or conditions. Under the control structure is the selection statement, and it has two types, which is the if-else program and nested if program. First is the if-else program. Its syntax is: here is how if-else program works. If the condition evaluates true, the code inside the body of if is executed. The code inside the body of else is skipped from execution if the condition evaluates false. The condition inside the body of else is executed. The code inside the body of if is skipped from execution. Let us have some examples of if-else program. First is displaying which condition is true. Here is its code. First, the user will input a condition. If it evaluates to true, then the body of if is executed. The program will display true 1. Otherwise, if the second condition input by the user evaluates to true, then the statement inside the body of else if is executed. True to will be displayed. Hence, the program displayed true to since the second condition evaluates to true. Next example is determining whether a number is positive or negative. Here is the program's code. First, number is declared as a variable. Second, it will display enter an integer. Third, the program will ask the user to enter a number. Fourth, the program will recognize whether the entered number by the user is a positive or negative integer using the conditions. Fifth, the program will display either you entered a positive integer followed by the number entered by the user, or you entered a negative integer followed by the number entered by the user, depending on what condition it satisfies. Last example is height classification. The code for this program is this. First, variable height is declared. Second, it will display height classification. Third, it will ask the user to enter a height in meters. Fourth, the program will classify whether the entered height is dwarf, average, or atoll using a condition. If the entered height is less than 1.5 meters, the program will display you entered a dwarf height. On the other hand, if the user entered a height that is greater than or equal to 1.5 and a height that is less than or equal to 1.64 meters, the program will display you entered an average height. And if the user entered a height that is greater than or equal to 1.65 meters, the program will display you entered a tall height. Let us now move on the next, which is the nested if. The syntax of nested if is the nested if is a multiple layers of if statements. There is a first outer if statement, and inside it is another inner if statement. Let's have some examples of nested if. First, determining if a number is odd or even. Here is the code. First, we take an integer as an input from the user and store it in the variable num. Second, it will display enter an integer. Third, the program will ask the user to enter a number. Fourth, the if-else statement will check whether the num is not equal to 0. If true, then the inner if-else statement is executed. If false, the code inside the outer else condition is executed, which prints the number is 0 and neither even nor odd. The inner if-else statement checks whether the input number is divisible by 2. If true, the program will print the number is even. If false, the program will print the number is odd. Another example is determining the largest number. Here is the code for the program. First, n1, n2, and n3 were declared as variables. Second, it will display enter 3 numbers. Third, the program will ask the user to enter 3 numbers. Fourth, the program finds out the largest number among 3 numbers entered by the user using the if-else statement. If num1 is greater or equal to num2 is true, then the inner if-else statement is executed. If false, the condition inside the outer else is executed. The inner if-else statement checks whether the num1 is greater than or equal to num3. If true, then the program will print largest number and the num1 entered by the user. If false, the program will display largest number and the num3 entered by the user. Last example is determining the relationship of two numbers. Here is the sample code. First, the float declaration of variable a and b and the program will display. Note, only numeric values only. Second, the program will display enter the value of a. Third, the program will ask the user to input a number for the value of a. Fourth, it will display enter the value of b. Fifth, the program will ask the user to input a number for the value of b. Sixth, if a is not equal to b, then it will proceed to the inner if statement. If false, the outer else condition will executed and the code will be displayed, which is a and b are equal. The inner if condition checks whether the input a is greater than b. If true, then it prints a is greater than b. If false, the program will display b is greater than a. We are now done with control structure. I will now pass the floor to Mr. Sharlone Andres to present the topics on for loop and while loop.
In for loop, the syntax for it is where initialization initializes variables and is executed only once. Condition: if true, the body of for loop is executed. If false, the for loop is terminated. In the update, updates the value of initialized variable and again checks the condition. Here is the flowchart. Let us have three examples. First is printing x from values from 0 to 4. Here is the code. The initialization creates an integer variable x and assigns it a value of 0. The condition states that the value of x must be less than 5. The increment increases the value of x by 1 after every iteration. To print the value of variable x alongside other text on the console, the ENDL is a C++ keyword meaning end line. The cursor will print in the next line in the next iteration. Second, finding the factorial of a number. This is the code for the example. First is the integer declaration of the variable num1 and factorial with a value of 1. Second, the program will display two null lines and find the factorial of a number and another one null line. Third, it will project series of dashes that will give the sign to the output and another null line. Fourth, the program will project input a number to find the factorial. Fifth is the program will allow the user to input the value of num1 that will act as the input number. Sixth is the for loop, which consists of initialization a is equal to 1 with the condition of a is less than or equal to the variable num1 with also an increment update for the initialized variable. The body of a formula of a factorial equals to factorial multiplied by a. That means that the value of the variable factorial is equal to the initial value or the previous value of the variable factorial multiplied by the input from the variable num1, and it will multiply itself to every element of the loop as long as the condition is true. If the condition is true, it will execute the command. If false, the for loop is terminated. Lastly, it will display the factorial of the given number is and the result of the factorial and a projection end line. Here is the third example, which is finding the power of a number. So this is the code. First, we have here the integer declaration of the variable bs, ex, num with a value of 1 and I. Second is the projection of the to new line, and it will display find power of any number using for loop and another new line. Third, it will project dashes that will be used as the sign of the output and another new line. Fourth is the projection of input the base. Fifth, it will allow the user to input the data from the variable bs that represents the base. Sixth is the projection of the input the exponent. Seventh, it will now allow the user to input the data from the variable ex that represents the exponent. Eighth is the start of the for loop, which consists of initialization I is equal to 1 with condition I is less than or equal to exponent, and then update increment I++, and the body contains a formula of num equal to num multiplied bs. That means that the value of the variable num is equal to the initial value or the previous value of the variable num multiplied by the input from the variable bs. This formula will continue the multiplication process as long as the condition is true. If the condition is true, it will execute the command. If false, the for loop is terminated. Lastly, it will display the value of the base with a power sign and the exponent and an equal sign and the value of the variable num after the for loop. That is all for loop. Let us now move on to while loop. While loop. The syntax for while loop is here. A while loop evaluates the condition. If the condition evaluates true, the code inside the while loop is executed. The condition is evaluated again. This process continues until the condition is false. When the condition evaluates to false, the loop terminates. Here is its flowchart. Let's have some examples. First is displaying the values of the variable I. Here is the code. First is the integer declaration of I, which has a value of 1. Second is the while loop together with its condition I less than or equal to 6. Third is the body of the while loop that will print value of variable I is and the value of I. The increment I++ will continue to print the content vertically because of the end line until the condition I less than or equal to 6 returns false. Next example is determining all even numbers from 1 to a certain number. The code for this example is: first is the integer declaration of the variable n and I with a value of 1. Second, the program will enter a number. Third, will allow the user to input number. Third is the while loop with the condition I less than or equal to n. Fourth, if the condition in the while loop is true, then it will continue to proceed to the if statement with another condition I with a modulo sign or the remainder 2 equals to 0. That means if the value of the variable n divided by 2 and there is 0 remainder, then it will continue to print the value of I from the increment I++ until the given condition I less than or equal n returns false. And last, multiplication table of 9. This is the code. First is the integer declaration of the variable m with a value of 1 and n with a value of 9. Second is the projection of the multiplication table of 9 with an end line. Third is the while loop block with the condition of m is not equal to 11. If it's true, then it will continue to print 9 times or 9 with an uppercase of x that will represent the sign multiplication, with the succeeding value of m equals to the n with a constant value of 9 multiplied by the succeeding value of m with another end line. The increment increases the value of m by 1 after every iteration until the given condition m not equal to 11 returns false. That's it, or that is all for topic while loop. Let us now move on to the nested loop to be represented by Miss Karen Joy MANGABAT.
A nested loop is a loop in which one loop resides inside another loop, where the inner loop gets executed first, satisfying all the set of conditions that prevailed within the loop followed by an outer loop set of conditions. Execution of statements within the loop flows in a way that the inner loop of the nested loop gets declared, initialized, and then incremented. Once all the condition within the inner loop gets satisfied and becomes true, it moves for the search of the outer loop. It is often called a loop within a loop. Examples for this program are: first, display 7 days of 4 weeks. Here is the code for the program. First is the declaration of the variable weeks, which has a value of 4, and days underscore in underscore week, which has a value of 7. Second, initializing I is equal to 1 with the condition of I is less than or equal to the weeks, which is 4, and an increment update for the initialized variable. Third, if the condition was true, then it will execute the body of the loop week, the value of I, and an end line. Fourth, initializing j is equal to 1 with the condition of j is less than or equal to number of days in week, which is 7, and an increment update for the initialized variable. Fifth, if the condition is true, it will execute the body of loop. If false, the loop terminates. Another example, program to display a pattern. Here is the code. First is the declaration of the variable rows, which has a value of 5, and columns, which has a value of 10. Second, initializing I is equal to 1 with the conditions of I is less than or equal to the number of rows, which is 5, and an increment update for the initialized variable. Third, if the condition was true, then it will execute the body of the loop rows, the value of I, and an end line. Fourth, initializing j is equal to 1 with the condition of j is less than or equal to number of columns, which is 10, and an increment update for the initialized variable. Fifth, if the condition is true, it will execute the body of loop. If false, the loop terminates. Lastly, displaying the prime numbers from 1 to 100. Here is its code. First, the declaration of the variable I and j. Second is the for block, which consists initialization of the I with an initial value of 1 and the condition of I less than 100, and an increment update of the variable I. Third, if the condition is true, it will execute the other for loop block, which consists of the initialization of the variable j with a value of 2 and a condition j is less than or equal to the division of I and j, and an increment update of the variable. If the statement is true, then it will execute the if statement block with the condition if there is no remainder and a break code. Fourth, if the statement is satisfied, then it will execute another if statement block with the condition of j greater than the division of I and j. Fifth, if the statement is true, then it will execute the command I is prime. That is all for the topic nested loop. And for the final topic, here is Mr. Christian Allan DURAN to present about array.
The syntax for array is: here is the diagram for the elements of array. The top part are the array members, while the bottom part are the array indices. Here is how to initialize array. Now let us proceed to the example of array. Here is its code. First, the integer declaration of the array name numbers with 5 size of the array. Second, it will display enter 5 numbers. Third is the store input from the user to array using for loop, which consists of initialization of the variable I with a value of 0 and condition which is I is less than 5 and I is increment. For every numbers that are being input the variable I increments only, then the program will stop if the variable I reaches the value of 5. Fourth, the program will display the numbers R and the 5 numbers in order entered by the users. That ends my presentation for array. For our proposal of a practical usage of C++ programming in real world, here is Miss Karen Joy MANGABAT to present.
Practical usage of C++ programming in real world. C++ is a cross-platform programming language for developing high-performance applications. C++ can also be used in developing games, operating system, web browsers, etc. Bjarne Stroustrup created this program as an addition to the C programming language. It gives programmers a high-level power over the system's memory and resources. The most common usage of browsers in C++ is for rendering. Since most people don't like to wait for a web page to load, rendering engines must be faster in their execution. With the fast performance of C++, most browsers have their rendering software written in C++. Our objectives in this proposal are: provide a fast execution for the rendering engines to display the content immediately, to develop back-end services that retrieve information from databases and render code into interactive web pages. For our methodology, in order to achieve the stated objectives, the use of improving and testing occasionally of web browsers made by the programmers and developers will be necessary. The objectives will be easily achieved if the desired expectations of the people will be met. Understanding the concepts related to C++, how it works, and what it is composed of will allow programmers and developers to build better browsers and be well prepared for potential issues that might arise, and developers can gain greater insight into how websites operate. As a result, they can create, produce, and disseminate information more quickly.
That ends our presentation for our final project. It has been a pleasure to meet you, sir, and become our professor in this subject. We thank you for your efforts on teaching us. We have learned a lot from you. Before we say goodbye, we would like to share this quote from Maya Angelou. You will face many defeats in life, but never let yourself be defeated. Thank you, sir. Bye.